Welcome everyone to today's presentation, Seamless Santa Cruz, featuring Ian Griffiths. I'm Barry Scott, and I live in Aptos, and I'm with the Coast Futura and Coastal Rail Santa Cruz and Friends of the Rail and Trail. And I'm really excited to have Ian here. I know Ian from his work with Seamless Bay Area, and I'll let him tell you what that's all about, but the wonderfulness of that effort, it has to do with the integration of various transit systems across the greater Bay Area region. And I asked Ian to work on what it might look like to have a integrated metro network with a rail line serving that system. So Ian, tell us about yourself and just take it away, please.
Yeah, thanks, Barry, for having me. I'm the policy director for a nonprofit called Seamless Bay Area, and Seamless Bay Area's mission is to bring about to transform the San Francisco Bay Area's fragmented public transit system into a world-class, unified, equitable, and widely used network by both building a diverse movement for change and actually promoting the policy reforms that can get us there. We focus on the 9-county Bay Area primarily, but we also really support the seamless integration across California, including with the adjacent parts of the Bay Area. And in recent years, we've been getting much more into California-wide issues because these issues don't just end in the Bay Area. They're certainly a challenge in a lot of different places. And my background prior to co-founding Seamless Bay Area in 2017 and 18, I've worked in public transportation and urban planning for the past 15 years. I went to UC Berkeley. That's how I ended up in California. I'm from Canada originally. Moved out here to do my master's of city planning at Berkeley. Lived and worked here as a planner for in San Francisco for about 5 years. Then I had the opportunity to actually move back to Canada, moved to Toronto, and worked in the public transit sector in the Greater Toronto region between 2012 and 2015. And that's really where I became fascinated with the policies that can bring about seamless integration, because what was going on in Toronto at the time, there was a newly created regional authority called Metrolinx that had been created to really integrate the entire region's transit and lay out a bold and compelling vision for a more effective transit system across the suburbs and the urban areas, and even the outlying greater mega region, integrating buses and trains, commuter rail service, urban service, wayfinding, fares, all of these different components of the customer experience. I moved back to the Bay Area then in 2015, and I started working at BART actually. And that was really where I saw how challenged the Bay Area was, because we didn't have this lead. We didn't have the institutional leadership that was bringing about that clear vision for change. And then after several years, advocacy became my full-time work to really bring about those types of changes, because they're so important for building transit ridership. So today, what I would like to, there's kind of two parts of my presentation that I have planned. The first part is to give you a little bit more of an overview of Seamless Bay Area and what we support in terms of bringing about a much higher ridership transit system. What are the aspects of seamless integration? What are the policies that bring about that, and how we're working to bring about that type of change, specifically in the Bay Area, but I think a lot of these things are relevant to Santa Cruz too. And we can take questions if there are any. But then the second part of the presentation, we'll be diving into Santa Cruz specifically, and what I've been working on after a few meetings with Barry and some other transit advocates in Santa Cruz is a vision map for service in the Santa Cruz region and in Santa Cruz County that imagines how a rail system, how the beginning of rail service on the Santa Cruz branch line could integrate seamlessly with bus service, how we might restructure metro services so that these two systems work in a complementary, seamless way as one system, because for riders, they don't like Sony, rail needs to be part of that type of network. So I'll share those maps. I would love feedback. I would love, and we'd be happy to take questions or just have a conversation based on that, that material. So with that, I'll jump into the first part of the presentation, unless there's anything else you wanted to say, Barry.
No, I want to thank you. I will give a heads up to Zenon and Michael, our local UC slugs who were helping us a little bit, and Michael Paisano as well. We had some, so that our guests know, we had some local assistance in this project. So please take it away.
Great. And you can, good, I hope you can hear me. All right, so I had introduced Seamless Bay Area already as a nonprofit. And of course, public transit is just so central to so many of Northern California's most pressing challenges. I think, Rod Dearden spoke, you said, Barry, a few days ago about how important it is for climate. It's obviously connected so closely to our housing affordability challenges in Northern California. The places, the number of housing options that you have access to is directly, related to how far you can get to using affordable transportation and hopefully sustainable transportation. And in the Bay Area, and I think this is largely true in Santa Cruz too, the transit system is not keeping up. We've seen declines in ridership in the Bay Area. I've also looked at the Santa Cruz numbers. It's going in a similar direction. All prior to COVID, we were seeing fewer people taking transit overall. We talk a lot to members of the public all over the region about whether they are interested in using transit. And what we hear over and over is, yes, people do want to use transit. They would use it more, but so often it's just not a logical choice for them. It takes too long. It maybe doesn't take people where they need to go. It's not structured in a convenient way for them, or it's not reliable enough. And a unique thing in the Bay Area and in the 9-county Bay Area, and one of the reasons why our system is not working is because it is extremely fragmented. We have 27 different transit agencies in the 9-county Bay Area, and they carry only 5 to 6% of all trips taken are on transit in comparison to 70 or 75% that are taken in cars. And I think that's probably similar for Santa Cruz. I think it's probably transit might be even a little lower than that. And this is much lower than regions around the world that have, comparable density. Even regions as spread out as the Bay Area is can do much better. And I think specifically that relevant here is that we have 7 different rail systems in the Bay Area, and they're very poorly integrated with the bus systems. And this is a unique thing in the Bay Area. It's not particularly unique in the United States, but it is a thing that we keep doing, is we create a new rail-focused agency just to run the rail service, and we don't do a very good job of integrating it with buses. And overall, this is keep holding us back from having a more effective network that takes people from anywhere to anywhere, which might require multiple agencies. There's barriers each time you cross from a different mode, or each time you cross to a different agency, of separate maps, separate schedules, different fare structures. Sometimes it can be very unfair that you end up paying more for taking transit, which should never be the case. Mm-hmm. And certainly in terms of the time it takes to make those trips, it makes so many of them, having so many different barriers between agencies makes many trips just uncompetitive to do on transit overall. And the result is, many of the billions that we're spending on new projects are not leading to the types of trip reductions that we want to see. So the vision that we want to see, and we've done a lot of maps, part of our advocacy is creating bold visions of what we want the future to be, to really inspire and motivate members of the public to step up and ask for this type of change. So this is the vision map that we've created for the 9-county Bay Area, showing what transit could look like if we put all of our high frequency lines in one network, if we planned it out in a logical way, connecting our local bus services, our regional services, our regional rail, and didn't think of just about agency boundaries, but think about the network that we want to have overall. So that network, our vision of a connected network, is one that's strategically planned at the regional scale to actually work as a system, where transit agencies, and there may continue to be many of them, we're not, we don't need to necessarily merge all the agencies into one to achieve this vision, but where those transit agencies, they do things in a consistent way so that the seams are invisible to the user. But that requires that there are certain standards, and it requires certain types of institutions that can oversee that standardization of certain aspects of the transit experience, including service quality, routes, fares, schedules, wayfinding, the signage that you see, the way that information is displayed to customers, to be as reliable and as simple as possible. Someone needs to be in charge, basically, if multiple agencies are going to do things in a common customer-focused way. And lastly, it's important to acknowledge that more funding is needed for more service overall. We can make improvements by making things more consistent and easier. But at the end of the day, if a bus only comes every half an hour or every hour, that's not a very convenient service for people who rely on transit. So having more funding to run more hours of service and have buses and trains come more often is another essential and additive part of how we make transit the preferred way of getting around. So I don't want to suggest here that we can do all these to create these efficiencies without more funding. We absolutely also need new funding. But I think it's a compelling case to ask for more funding from the public when you have this clear vision of connectivity that presents a really powerful value proposition to the public who we're in California, we need to ask to approve funding for transit service. And of course, just the preview of the extension of this map down to Santa Cruz, you'll see here that we've begun to extend this down. So I'll go into this later in the second half of the presentation, but I would love to see this approach, extended to allow for seamless travel between Santa Cruz and the Bay Area, because so many people do that currently. There's so much travel and traffic and challenges around those connections currently. And we often hear about people who are skeptical say, well, but the Bay Area is so big and so spread out, and there's so many different, there's bodies of water, and there's different small cities or medium-sized cities. There are many examples certainly there are challenges here in the Bay Area. There's many different levels of government. We're very balkanized in many ways, but we've looked at examples from around the world, and we know that there are regions that are just as fragmented as we are and have many of the same geographical challenges and are extremely spread out with many agencies and municipalities, and they're doing much better. And one example shown here is the Greater Frankfurt region in Germany, which similar population, more municipalities, more cities, more transit agencies, 160 transit operating companies, in compared to just a mere 27 in the Bay Area. Since creating the governance and fare integration reforms in the early 90s, they've seen a 60% growth of transit ridership between 1996 and 2017, in comparison to just 16% growth in the Bay Area during that same period. And they now currently have, triple the mode share of transit. 19% of all trips are taken on transit, in comparison to just about 6% in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we think that with these policy reforms, we can do much better, and really many of these European regions are great examples for how you achieve a seamless system, even when you have many different levels of government, many different institutions, and a lot of complexity. So the three initiatives that we focus on at Seamless is right now our campaign to integrate fares specifically, so that the amount that you pay is simple and affordable and really encourages transit use. And that's a big barrier right now. We have an effort focused on creating a network manager for the Bay Area, really an institution that has the mandate and authority to actually integrate all forms of transit in our region. And then we have a third campaign to actually get the funding that we need to, over the medium and longer term to actually run more service, to have more for operations. That is going to, again, in combination with these two other policies, be able to really transform the attractiveness of public transit for riders and make it a much more convenient way of getting around. So on the network manager piece, just a little bit more about this specific concept, which is that we need to have in the Bay Area, we need to have an entity that actually is accountable for the system as a whole, that oversees certain key functions of the system that are listed here under this first image, including long-range planning, fare policy, service standards, schedules, customer experience, branding, being able to make those aspects of the transit system seamless and logically connected. And individual transit agencies can continue to oversee a range of functions. And we know that this can be done while recognizing that we have diverse local funding sources. We have many different, we might continue to have many operators that make a lot of local decisions. Mm-hmm. The fare integration piece, so we created this map a couple years ago to really try to get people to imagine how, if we had a single integrated fare structure, a zone-based fare structure for the Bay Area, how that would change how much you would pay for transit and how it might cause you to think differently about where you're going. So this is a simple zone-based fare structure where essentially you count the number of zones that you go, and it's basically $1 extra per zone. And it doesn't matter whether you take BART and Caltrain and a bus to get there, or 3 buses, or a ferry and a bus. You basically are just more or less being charged by the distance that you're going. And if you're going, within 2 zones, 1 or 2 zones, it's basically a local fare. It's basically $2.20. So it doesn't change. It doesn't make local travel any more expensive, but it really makes a big difference for trips that might be not local, that are regional in nature, and helps just assure a rider that they're going to get the best deal no matter which way they go. And this is an example of a trip from Redwood City down to San Jose, that right now the current fare for doing that trip by using Caltrain and BTA would be $10.20. So with whereas if we were to apply a common fare structure, our zone-based system, this would be much closer to what BART it would cost if you were to take BART on this trip, if BART actually went between these 2 locations. And any types of discounts that we would offer could be done in a standardized way, so that it isn't you get this amount of discount if you're a student in this agency, and this amount if you're a senior at that agency. We can have a common set of discounts that make things easier for people to understand. So I'll skip. This is a timeline. I won't go into this in detail, but basically we've been working to bring about some legislation over the next couple of years, but through working on these 3 initiatives. And our hope is that within the next 2 or 3 years, through a combination of legislation, policy changes, and ultimately a ballot measure in 2024 in the Bay Area, we can have these the progress in these key initiatives that really set us up for changing in trajectory of transit use in the Bay Area and get us on that positive trajectory of growing use instead of stagnating use. And then the very last thing before I pause for questions, if there are any, is a specific piece of legislation that I wanted to highlight that you may have heard of. If you've heard of us before, you've been watching, is a bill that we have in Sacramento right now called the Seamless Transit Transformation Act, or SB 917, with Senator Josh Becker. Basically, what this piece of legislation does is it sets deadlines for our region to deliver on certain aspects of integration that have been discussed for the past 2 years through a regional initiative called the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force. So that task force, identified the need to develop a common integrated fare structure and introduced free transfers between services. It identified the need to create a connected network service plan for how routes should connect in the future. It identified the need for a common transit mapping and wayfinding system for our region. and also the need for standards for real-time data so that, real-time arrival information is available, across all of our region in a common format. So what this bill does, it is actually requires that our region deliver on these 4 components that we've already agreed to, but that we know can be delayed unless there's clear, deadlines for doing it. And any one transit agency in our region can hold up progress if they decide that, they want to drag their feet on implementing one of these policies. So this really attaches these deadlines to the allocation of funding to the transit agencies within our region. And we're hopeful this will make it through the state legislature. So far, there's no formal opposition. So that would be a really great step for the Bay Area. And we hope maybe a model for the rest of California if this piece of legislation passes. So I will pause there in case there are any questions on the first part of my presentation before I go into the Santa Cruz specific stuff.
I'm not seeing any raised hands oh wait, Adrian has a raised hand, and Adrian, I'm going to permit you to speak if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, please.
Thank you, Barry. Hi, Ian. Yeah, I just, you made a comment earlier in your presentation. I just wanted to emphasize that it's really critical that we move to a transit system that is attractive to those that in the industry they call quote unquote choice riders. And what that means is not that they're better people or anything like that. In the industry, choice rider is someone who is choosing to use transit because it's actually for them a better option. And too often transit services, especially bus services, are run by people that are concerned with coverage. And so routes meander around, and they do not, the system design does not value people's time, and they don't really prioritize or care about that it takes too long to transfer and get from point A to point B. And so you wind up with, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You end up with most of our bus transit agencies. I know Sam Trans, this is true, and I believe the majority of the Bay Area, bus ridership is largely composed of people that have no other option, transit dependents, in other words. And so they're sort of a captive audience. And so, they can sort of be taken for granted, if you will, a little bit more than someone who has a car waiting for them in the driveway. So it's really critical. If we want to be like Germany, which is, I am German, and I've spent a lot of time gallivanting around Germany and understanding their, what they call Verkehrsverbund, which is really the vision that Ian, you're laying out. Essentially, it sounds like those folks, including in management, know either frequently use transit or know what it means to actually be a choice rider, and so they understand and cater more toward without shortchanging those who are dependent, but they have a system that really does have significant value to those who have a BMW or a Porsche sitting in their driveway, and they prefer to take the train because it gets them there quicker or with less stress and all of that. So that's a really, really critical element that in America needs to be more emphasized all over America, and especially in the Bay Area. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, I agree, and I just would add that I think that's one of the reasons why I think the fact that so much of the transit system just isn't competitive with driving has been, I think, in the studies that I've read about the causes of ridership declines in recent years, and particularly in Southern California. It's because when people's incomes are great enough that they can buy a car, they do. And so it's sort of like, if service is so bad that, the moment that people can afford to not take it, they won't, then that's like a recipe for declining ridership, assuming that incomes are so steadily going up, which, hopefully they are, although that's not always the case. But I think we can't be, I think the philosophy of just, of course, we need to serve those who depend on transit. I think no one's debating whether we should continue to do that. Of course, it's very important to do that, but we need to be thinking forward to capturing more of the market, because that's the transit dependent is a sort of shrinking market of transit, and that sort of leads to a slow death spiral if we're not restructuring service to be more competitive, to be attracting choice riders. So.
Yeah. And so Ian, right, in this area, it's no secret that housing costs are insane, and so we are gentrifying. And so the transit dependent population, those who cannot afford or have a car, I would venture to say is probably shrinking. And the very dynamic you just described is that as soon as people get a car, they abandon transit. Well, what you're in essence saying, as soon as they convert from being transit dependent to being a quote choice rider, meaning they do have a car available to them, they abandon transit. And that
they
right
choose
there,
not to take transit. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's the indictment. That's the very problem I think I'm trying to highlight here. And in Germany, and in places where transit really works well, it's not just the people who have to take transit. It's literally the quote unquote elites and the very well paid people who have a couple cars in their driveway, and they still opt to take transit because it's the better choice. And so that is a mindset that is lacking here. I feel in much of the United States, even here in the Bay Area, the way transit is designed, there's often a thought, well, that people that can drive will, and we're just going to cater to those that whether it's on purpose or not, that have no other choice.
Thank you, Adrian. We have another question in chat from Linda, which a comment and question. I think public transportation has a negative connotation in our culture for many reasons. How do you see that changing so it again becomes a word of collective desirable choice?
Yeah, I think I think fundamentally the experience of taking it has to be, I think there's a stigma associated with public transit, and then there's people's actual experience.
Right.
So I think if you never take public, there's like, the first thing is maybe something that a robust marketing campaign could address. But I think more importantly, I think people's experience, if you use transit, if you attempt to use transit and it's a terrible, confusing, stressful experience, you get lost, you don't feel like you're treated like you're treated like your time matters. Yes. Because some very obvious sign was not put up or some announcement wasn't made. That is a real, I think that's part of why public transit has a bad reputation. I certainly sometimes often feel that way, and yet I still keep coming back to public transit. So I think putting the customer at the center of service and really is part of resuscitating the reputation of public transit. And I think a number of agencies across the continent have been successful at doing that, and really being able to change the impression of it. But there's some people who will just never see public transit as a viable option, and we probably don't need to even focus on people who are just simply would never ever consider it. But I think by putting out service that maybe once they might try, that can really, if they have a positive experience, it might cause them to be more likely to try it. If they tried a train, now they might try a bus. So I think we can really focus on improving the experience and is the core of that issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that answer. The cultural aspects of public transit here are profound, of course. It's an American thing, the dream of the car. I've my own question. Have you or other transit planners tracked much the correlation between low gas prices and the drop in ridership? And I know I've seen unfortunate articles that seem to connect greater numbers of people owning cars with a more successful economy. I've seen editorials and articles for Los Angeles saying, hey, things are wonderful because more and more people are driving. More and more households have a car. Wow. What can you say to fuel prices, and are there any projections that maybe with the higher fuel prices, would people be more likely to use transit if we can make it available?
Yeah, I know there are studies that say that there is an effect that gas prices have, but it's only to a point, right? So it's like if there's no viable transit option that is convenient and time competitive, it doesn't matter how expensive gas is. It's just not a choice. There's no transit option for you to switch to. Right. So when there's a transit option, I think there, you'll see more of that correlation. But I think a big issue, a much larger issue is the quality of the service, and that's keeping, that's creating the ceiling for what transit ridership can grow toward. And we can also price gas differently. Obviously we have the policy tools to be right. Charging, for road, gas, gas or car prices. So those. But I don't think the solution, I support making it more affordable to take transit and in some cases more expensive to drive, but I don't think that's a very good policy solution without providing quality, public transit. You need to give people a good option. Otherwise you're just punishing people and you're not giving them any alternatives.
That's what it feels like sometimes around here. No rail. So look, I think I don't see more questions at this moment. And so I'm excited to invite you to move to part 2 of your presentation.
Great. All right. So I'll move right along. Close some of these windows here. The chat. Okay. So looking a little bit at, so I'm admittedly, I live in San Francisco. I've gone to Santa Cruz, visited Santa Cruz many times over the past 15 years. I am not an expert in Santa Cruz County and have very limited experience using Santa Cruz Metro. But, over the past couple of weeks, I've been learning more about it and talking and, doing some of my own research. And so, a couple observations just around current transit in Santa Cruz County. Obviously one strength is that you don't really have this fragmentation issue because there's one agency that really is for the entire county, which is, I think, an opportunity for, especially as you consider rail service. I think transit ridership overall is not bad considering for the size of the population and for the size of the region. And I think that's connected to the fact that there's a university, a strong demand from university students and other populations. So there's a base to build off of, certainly. But definitely challenges are, I have seen that the ridership has been going down in recent years and the amount of service has been going down. So that's always disappointing to see. And that's usually a big factor in declining ridership is if there's fewer buses running, of course, fewer people are going to use them. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the cause of those service cuts have been. This is prior to COVID, of course. I imagine there's further challenges because of COVID. It's a small overall population, and my observation is relatively limited growth is planned, which is maybe that could change. Maybe there'll be more growth planned. That certainly can help with the case for building more transit and improving transit use. So and land uses can be challenging in certain parts of the county, but all regions certainly have their land use challenges. So now I started by doing a little bit of research on a couple of comparable, some other regions and areas where there is rail service that I thought were maybe relevant to thinking as I thought about how rail service could be structured and how it could evolve in Santa Cruz County and on the Santa Cruz branch corridor. So one example that I know about is that it seems is an interesting one to look to is the Kitchener-Waterloo region in Canada. So this is a small city about 65 miles from Toronto. Toronto is a region of about 7 million, so it's kind of a similar distance away from Toronto as Santa Cruz is from the Bay Area. It is bigger. It's Kitchener-Waterloo has about 400,000 people, but they just opened a new light rail line, and it's actually the smallest region in North America to have its own light rail system. That just opened in 2019. It's a 12-mile long segment. And it was introduced alongside, a robust BRT system, and we've done it very much in concert with the bus system that was there. And it has the service that it was introduced was on opening day. It had 10 to 15 minute frequencies throughout the day, and then up to 8 to 10 minute frequencies during the peak. And the ridership, it opened in 2019, so it only had a few months of normal service prior to the pandemic happening, but it had already attracted about almost 20,000 daily riders, which is pretty good, I think, in comparison to many systems. And I know it's building its way back there, due to the pandemic. So these are images of how you can see here on the upper right-hand corner, they picked a corridor that really is the primary transit route in the region that was well served by buses, and really making it rail service is expanding the capacity and the reliability of that corridor. They very intentionally restructured the bus service when they introduced this rail service to be maximizing those connections. And they set up the fare system very intentionally to be integrated so that it's really the same fare that you pay. You don't pay an extra fare to switch from bus to train, back to bus again. You can use them in any combination, and it works seamlessly. I think that's partly and these are some policies that they very intentionally introduced with that rail service. It's called ION is the name of the light rail. So seamless connections, the introduction of new express routes, focusing on supporting a grid pattern to make transfers as frequent and easy as possible, a single fare structure, and then also looking at the shelters and some of the aspects of the customer experience to make it more comfortable to really be a part of a holistic way of building transit ridership in the region. Another project that seemed quite relevant is also in Canada. These are all Canadian examples. So is the Ottawa, what is now called the Trillium Line, but when it opened, it was called the O Train. So this is a train that was opened in 2001 on a single track. So there was a single old rail right of way going from downtown Ottawa southward, and it was only 5 stations, and it was opened kind of as a pilot project. And this station, you can see here, it's from a few years ago, but there's not a lot around the station. So the land use isn't even necessarily that great. At least it's changed in recent years, but it did remarkably well, and it attracted, it made its way up to, I think it's about 20,000 daily riders use this service. Much of it is still just a single track. They have passing tracks at key locations that allows it. Initially, it was running at 15-minute service. The stations are quite far apart and slightly different from how some of the concepts for light rail are planned in Santa Cruz. But this image shows that it's really part of a broader network. So and that's one of the reasons why the ridership is so high. So Ottawa has a really robust bus rapid transit system. All of the blue lines going east-west here and green are part of their BRT network. This red, that's the rail line that I was referring to that opened up, but it's connected at both ends, and it really relies off of more so the connections to the bus services is the primary driver of ridership, rather than things that are necessarily within walking distance of the O train stations. So yeah, some success factors are, there's serving of major destinations, having the good local service frequencies, integrating with the bus network, and over time, these have really attracted more land use intensification, which is a further supported ridership. So those are 2 services that run from day one. They ran 15-minute frequencies all day long. Another model that might be, and I think sort of as I think about it more, I think actually might be more applicable to an early service concept for the Santa Cruz rail line would be more of a commuter focused service initially, with buses integrating to provide all day service and ramping up service over time. And this is very much the model that is in the Toronto region at Go Transit, which is the regional transit agency, that also where I used to work, that the way that they run bus and rail service in an integrated way. So they Go Transit has buses and trains. And this is looking at one specific corridor, just as an example, called the Barry Corridor. But you can see the rail line is in blue. There's a number of stations. The schedule is here on the right. So you can see each of these, the system is structured in a way that, there's trains that go in the peak direction when traffic is the worst, and that the trains really provide the faster service, compared to driving. They're competitive during the morning going in the southbound direction. But then you see in white, all the white rows here in the schedule are buses. So there are buses running all day long, in both directions. Basically, if you show up at one of these stations, there's either a bus or a train going in both directions all day long. And if you're going in the peak direction, it'll be a train, and therefore it'll be able to carry a lot more people, and it'll probably be faster as well. But even if you happen to miss the train, or if you can rely, they make real hubs during all times of the day, because there is always some type of transit service. So the ability for Go Transit to run both buses and trains in an integrated way, to run those services together, and then also to have the local services that are feeding those stations in an integrated way, have really helped Go Transit be a really high performer in North America in terms of building ridership, but in a very incremental way, and focusing on starting with one train and adding another train and adding another train as the demand calls for it. And now they're in the process of electrifying all of these corridors and double tracking them all. So ultimately, they are in the process of converting to a true regional rail system that is two-way, all-day service, all going to be on rail, but that will take many years. But even the service that's there right now is quite good, and a lot of it is bus service. As a counter example, I think I sort of my observation, and I realize maybe this might be somewhat, I observe that, like, in comparison to those examples, like the most recent example of a new rail project that we have here in the Bay Area with the SMART system is less successful in a number of ways. The ridership is quite low, but it really duplicated an existing regional bus system, and it's not very integrated with that regional bus system. Unlike Go Transit, which I just showed, where you logically could be operating SMART and Golden Gate Transit, which goes through along this exact same corridor. You could be running those two services in an integrated way with integrated fares and schedules, so that you're really providing more frequency. But instead, they all go to different stations. Like the SMART stations are not necessarily where the bus stations are. There's some poor connections, in particular at like Larkspur, where it doesn't really connect to the ferry. It takes a 15-minute walk to get there. They have service throughout the day, but it's 30 to 60-minute headways. So in that sense, it is all day. That's a good thing, but it's unclear. It doesn't seem to be translating into a lot of use. So I think those are all sort of lessons to be learned from different systems and now moving towards the actual, the Santa Cruz piece and the exercise that I completed. So first I wanted to, just in terms of trying to understand the Santa Cruz network, the maps, it's really hard to understand the Santa Cruz network. And I think this is just wanted to make a comment on, the website, the way that information is displayed to customers online when they're trying to plan their trip is currently a problem, and an area that that alone could be really improved upon. I know there's some new website planning tools in the works, but it's very difficult to know where transit takes you when this is the sort of the way that you are presented the network as you're trying to understand. If you're an occasional user, if you use it all the time, then maybe this makes sense to you. But if you're a new user that's thinking about using it, or if you haven't used it in a while and you don't know where all the routes go, this is a really difficult interface to navigate. After doing some digging, I did finally find some more easy to understand maps. I think the work, of course, on the Santa Cruz branch line, I've reviewed some of the studies that have been created, and I'm really pleased to see that this is being considered as part of like one of 3 corridors that is really connecting the East and the West, and trying to, I think it's really important to be planning service in a way across these 3 corridors. The Sequel, and I'm going to get the pronunciation of some of these. Is that right, Barry? Soquel Drive, the branch line, and then Highway 1 as being the 3 main east-west corridors.
Right.
So here we are. So this image is really beginning to show how, you know, our vision map really is the logic behind it is that we did for the Bay Area is identifying these high frequency services across the different modes. And so we've begun to show what that looks like. If we extend that to Santa Cruz, I will zoom in so you can see more closely, but really trying to create the basis, the skeleton of a frequent rapid transit network that you just show up on any of these lines, and if there's going to be something that comes relatively soon. So what does that look like? So this is kind of an approximation. It's not perfect of what transit service is currently like, connecting, you know, downtown San Jose and Santa Cruz. You've got the Highway 17 corridor. It's actually only probably once an hour or so. You have a service along Highway 1 during much of the day, and then you have a couple of high quality routes, you know, around the university and then within Watsonville. You don't have any connection at all between Gilroy and Watsonville. I was surprised to learn it's impossible. There's no transit that currently exists there. So with the extension of Caltrain southward from Gilroy, with stations at Pajaro and Castroville, you know, there's this opportunity for the coast, the Santa Cruz branch line to really connect at Pajaro and to connect at key hubs and you know, Aptos, Watsonville, and downtown Santa Cruz are, you know, just seem to be really, really important places for these to connect. And really thinking about how the service, the local service, can be improved on these connecting routes to feed into these stations, to really form the basis of a coherent network that a rider can look at and sort of understand and have some confidence that if they're on any of these transit corridors, they'll be able to get to any other part of the subregion. And thinking about this is a subtle color change. This is going from gray to green and orange, thinking about over time from a commuter rail service that might be only during the peak times, like that Go Transit service that I was talking about. You know, as we have more funding for double tracking or you know, other electrification improvements, we can potentially see that rail corridor transitioning into a higher quality service that's more frequent all throughout the day. So then zooming in a little more closely here and just explaining this a little bit more. So this is sort of the initial concept for how I think, you know, you could run rail service along this corridor. Again, the gray is the peak, you know, thinking about it as initially with, you know, focusing on the peak direction service, you know, during those periods of time when the highway is especially backed up and maybe you don't need as many trains, you just need to, you're running focused service that really is competitive with the driving time when the traffic is really backed up. And I have some animation here. So here's, you know, in the morning, for example, you could be the dominant travel direction is from Watsonville to downtown Santa Cruz. And, you know, in the evening, it would be in the opposite direction. And what you could do, again, to take that concept from Toronto is, you know, ensuring that you're running the bus service between these key corridors all throughout the day. So the first image is the train is really taking the pressure off of the bus services and ensuring that it's much more, it is faster because it doesn't get stuck in traffic. But by ensuring that you're continuing to provide regular frequencies of buses along Sokol and Highway 1 between these key hubs, you can ensure that at these key points, there's always going to be a bus or a train coming, especially at Aptos, at downtown Santa Cruz and at Watsonville. You know, these three hubs are really, you know, I'm seeing them as really important points for connections. You know, I know that downtown Santa Cruz is not currently, you know, very well connected on the rail alignment, but I just, looking at this, it does seem that it's really critical to figure out some way of it connecting into downtown, because that is where all, you know, so much of the demand is, and all the connections to UC Santa Cruz are going through downtown currently. So to really make, I think to me that should be a really high priority for the rail line, is figuring out what alignment makes sense for connection to downtown. And then the long-term concept, again, this is a subtle change, but again, thinking about going from a commuter service to an all-day type service along these corridors, and really having, really a high quality local network, in particular, all the way from UC Santa Cruz to Aptos. The rail becoming more of a less of a commute-based service, but really more of a all type of all-day service. And then, from Aptos to Watsonville, it might be less frequent. You might have some trains terminating in Aptos and some going all the way to Watsonville and Pajaro, depending on how much service there is, going to Gilroy and connecting down to Salinas. Quickly, very, very briefly here, I'm almost done here. I just did a little bit of thinking again on those are the service concepts, but thinking also about like the other aspects of what makes transit seamless. And in terms of fares, I think just as a general principle, my view would be that the fares on this type of train should be the same as on the buses. And if we developed a zone-based concept for our fare vision map that I shared before. So I showed you that image of this. This is what it looks like. In the colors are how it would look like on a real map. But if you were to extend those same sized zones, which are about 7 miles in diameter, to Santa Cruz, all the way from Gilroy and from the Bay Area, what you'd see here is it's basically an extra $1 to go one more zone. Mm-hmm. And the way this is structured, that 1 to 2 zones, the first 2 zones you go is sort of considered the local fare. So, which in this map it's $2.20. I think it's $2 in Santa Cruz. So this is a bit higher than what it currently is in Santa Cruz. But you could imagine that if this was part of the rollout of a rail system, the movement towards this type of common fare structure, it would make it a sort of more transparent fare of how of going different distances that isn't too much of a big jump if you're going a little bit further. It's also cheaper, I think, currently than what it costs to take the bus across to San Jose from Santa Cruz, which is I think $7. Mm-hmm. So those are the prices from Santa Cruz, and then this would be the prices from a trip originating in Watsonville, how that logic would work. And potentially you could extend this all to Salinas and to other places as well. And recognizing people are going to take a combination of buses and trains to get where they need to go, and this just type of common system would give people the confidence that they're not going to get ripped off just because they happen to use a train instead of a bus for one part of their journey. And then very lastly, on branding, I think personally, another component of success for the project would be branding the train and the buses as part of the same system. And I actually think Santa Cruz Metro has a great brand right now, so I would say that should become the brand for the transit system. And any brand that you develop for the rail is really a sub-brand of the system as a whole, and mm-hmm. thinking about how you can have a family of brands: Metro Rail, Metro Bus, maybe some kind of express bus, Metro Express Bus, can really help market the system as an entire system. Again, unlike SMART, where you're saying, well, take SMART, but you're not saying take transit, any ticket, take Golden Gate or SMART, we don't care. Whatever's most convenient for you, you can really be saying take transit, and the rail system is part of the entire system. I think those would be important parts of creating the perception of a seamless system and the ease of use for customers. So this is my last slide here. Just in summary, some success factors to reflect upon. First, don't create a new agency just for the rail project. I would say if needed. If Santa Cruz Metro is not currently optimally structured, I would really focus on fixing it rather than making it fit for the purpose of delivering a rail project and the bus system it operates, rather than creating a separate entity. Because the moment you create a separate entity, you're going to be it becomes very, very difficult to have the two systems work in concert and to be making system-wide decisions. I think structuring the service initially to be time competitive as being a really important way of initially attracting people to the service, serving major destinations, and I think a real focus should be on figuring out a way of having the service serve, the downtown bus terminal if possible. Having seamless connections at some of those major hubs where the bus networks and the rail networks come together. Making it easier to explain to people and understand. And I think through the mapping, through the branding and design of all of these components, really deliberately, it can be presented as a really simple system to access. And I think that's going to be important for building ridership on day one. And then attracting a lot of the visitors and the choice riders that aren't going to be dependent on this, but are maybe interested in taking it if it looks approachable and easy to use. Obviously, integrate fares between the rail and the bus. As you think about funding operations, really make sure you're funding both the rail operations and the bus operations together, and not having one compete with the other. Having to dip into bus operations funds to keep rail operations going. I think to build a case to voters that you want to fund both, you want to increase service on both bus and rail, would be a really compelling way of making sure that you're not going to be accidentally diverting bus funding in order to keep rail service going if your ridership projections don't meet what they're supposed to be. And then branding the whole transit network as a network. So all of this requires that you preserve the ability to keep transit on the rail right away, of course. So that goes without saying. But anyway, that's the end of my presentation here. And sorry if I went a few minutes over here, but happy to take any questions or have a discussion if you'd like.
Not at all. We, Ian, thank you so much. And we're not in a hurry to end on any particular time point. The last presentation went a full 90 minutes, and to the extent that you're available and we're interested, we can go as long as we want. Yes, to your last point, we have to keep transit on the rail right away, and if we don't have the rail, if we don't keep the rail line there and permitted as it is today, and if we don't defeat Measure D, the initiative that would seek to remove the middle of it, we'll be in trouble. My favorite point in your summary is trains, buses, bikes, and pedestrians are all one network, and that I hope would be part of the branding, and all of your points are great. But I wanted to use that bullet point to go to Bob Arco's question that's in the Q&A section here. What systems represent, I think what systems out there that we might look into or be familiar with, what systems represent a benchmark for thoughtful integration of expanding personal mobility options? While trains can be relatively easy to configure to accommodate bikes, e-bikes, scooters, etc., I'm not aware of buses that offer similar affordances. It seems to me a rider-centric model of seamless service would need to overcome this challenge.
Interesting. Well, on the specific matter of bikes on buses, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly know there's various types of racks. I bring my bike on a bus all the time here in San Francisco. Racks are, they do require that you lift your bike, and you have to be strong enough to use it. It's not the easiest thing to use. And certainly, yeah, trains with level boarding, anything with level boarding and enough space to actually store a bike, which is, I think space is a problem on a bus to bring it in the bus, because you're potentially taking space away from passengers. So I think having options for people, having those racks if people want to use them. I'm not aware of a especially great bus system that overcomes these challenges with bikes, but I think having a plentiful bike share network, I feel like it's been kind of transformative having a bike share network and plentiful local options, such that it means that I don't need to bring a bike in so many cases, at least here within the Bay Area, right, because there are bike share pods. So I think that's part of not needing to take your own bike on a bus, but rather having thoughtfully placed, first mile, last mile options available at these key hubs, at the train stations, and at some of the key the bus networks. And I think I think that's Swiss. I would say, having recently dived very deeply into the Swiss transit system, I know they're doing a lot of really incredible work, thinking thoughtfully about locating first mile like car share, bike share, scooter share, in a very highly integrated way at all of their rail stations throughout the country, really trying to make sure that someone coming off of a train or coming off of a bus has, all of that, like a lot of non-automotive options. And if they even need to use a car, they've got a public car share option right there. They don't need to have their own personal vehicle. So I think having it overseen by the level of government that has a broad mobility mandate, Santa Cruz Metro, hopefully in Santa Cruz, or in the Bay Area, the network manager that we hope we to create, and having them with the clear mobility mandate, I think is ultimately what's needed to be able to be thoughtful about doing this in a highly organized way.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Our last speaker, Michael Seth Wexler, talked about the Danish model versus the Dutch model. The Danish model being bikes that are fit on trains, and the Dutch model being more about bike share programs and bike rentals at each end of the trip. So there's probably some combination in there, and there's no escaping Zip cars and Uber and Lyft is potentially a part of this solution for some users, and so it's always a yes and all things can be part of a network, right?
Yeah.
I've got a comment from Linda that I'll just go ahead and read. Linda Wilshusen says, I really like the summary. We have in the past looked at a connection both to Metro and also to UCSC. UCSC more of a challenge due to the elevation change. Unfortunately, in our area, competition has been stoked between buses and rail, bikes and rail and highway improvements, like these, three different factions that are warring with one another. And she appreciates appreciate your point of view on how to address she would appreciate your point of view on how to address any of these issues. There are the highway wideners, just give us more lanes. There's the don't take our, your train's going to impact our buses, and your train's going to take away our bike goodness. How do you recommend we might best address these issues?
Yeah, I think they need to be talked about in the same conversation. I think I'm not sure. I can totally see how that happens, and I think it's a common thing that probably happens everywhere. But I think it's an easy. I think it's why having a starting place of a clear vision is really important, because without a clear vision that is based on mobility, I think it is easy to say, if your vision only is rail, if your vision is only, one thing, and it's not just broad mobility, it's not freedom, and it's not having options, then you're going to say, well, your project is going to come at the cost of my project, or your form of mobility is going to come at the cost of my preferred form of mobility. So I think that having advocacy focus on not just one mode, but really mobility in general, and then the specific modes, trains, buses, and transit as being, all complementary ingredients toward, better mobility, more sustainable mobility. I think that's been, an ongoing thing for Seamless Bay Area. I just was reflecting upon advocacy is having everyone be able to see within your vision something for them. So I don't know if that's useful for Santa Cruz, but I think to the extent that you can articulate the goals of the rail project as part of a seamlessly integrated mobility network that is affordable and that reduces our reliance on vehicles, that is consistent with a trail network, which I think you're already doing. But I think that just you can't say it enough times. People are always going to probably take issue with it, but I think if you say it enough times, hopefully people actually start to believe you. And you invest in all of them. I think ultimately you need to be investing in all of these things. You can't just be asking for money for one thing. You have to be asking for money for all of the things that that can make this a reality.
That is helpful. Thank you. And it is, as we say sometimes, just we need in all of the above solutions, all of the above. Linda adds another question. How do you see the benefits of walking as a primary mode for accessing transit, bus and rail?
Oh, well, certainly that's the ideal way of accessing transit, bus, and rail. I think that's what most people are walking. I think some cyclists are, it's nice. It's a nice, convenient option. But usually, I prefer to walk to a bus or a train and not have to bring my bike with me, if at all possible. Yeah. So, I think to the extent that investing in the pedestrian infrastructure that provides access to these stations is maybe that's a winning approach to building the case. If you're saying we're going to be upgrading the pedestrian connections to these rail stations as part of this project, it might be another way of building support for it.
I think you're right, and we do, at least in my neighborhood, sometimes pedestrians are the last to be considered for some of the safety improvements that we need, such as the kind of the lack of space in some cases, but also just the predominance of motor vehicle concerns and improvements. So everything begins with almost every trip begins with some degree of walking, a little bit of walking to your car or to your bike. And Bob Arco adds, that's what Coast Connect was created to represent here in just systemic seamless mobility, a kind of truly all modes working in a cohesive way and not in a competitive way. And so we have our local campaign and effort, coastconnect.org, which we're very proud of. And so I want to ask Ian if your slideshow is something you can make available to us later.
Yep, definitely.
Beautiful. And I'm going to check and see. I don't see other hands raised. It's my hope that this presentation and the prior presentation, as well as Thursday's presentation by Rod Diridon, and we also had Christina Watson from Transportation Agency of Monterey County. That the three. This is the third of this week's series on transportation, and we're going to make these all available by YouTube for free. And I'm looking forward to having these out here. I'm looking forward to defeating Measure D, and I don't want to be complacent, but I think enough of us want to see that go down, that it will go down. So with that, Ian, I just want to thank you. Everybody is thanking you in the chat, and let me see if there's anything left. No, everybody says thank you, and Ian, I thank you for sure, and on behalf of everyone in Santa Cruz County and future generations, thanks for helping us with our efforts.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, great.
Good luck, and yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.